Good afternoon and welcome to Real Women Run's second session in our 2021 winter webinar series. Today we're going to have a panel discussion about what it's like to run for office. My name is Yandere Chatwin. I am the chair of the 2021 Real Women Run Organizing Committee, and on behalf of the committee and the YWCA Utah, thank you so much for joining us. I encourage you watching this live to introduce yourself in the chat. Let us know what part of the state you're tuning in from. If you've run for office before, feel free to add any questions in the chat, and we're hopeful to have a good discussion today. Real Women Run is a collaborative, nonpartisan initiative of the YWCA Utah, and it's led by a dynamic organizing committee. We have some really brilliant women in our group. And these volunteers have taken on the challenges presented by the COVID-19 pandemic, and we've pivoted and we've taken our programming virtual this year. We're so excited to be able to do that because it allows us to reach women in different parts of the state, places we've never been able to hold a live training before, and we're really excited to have you with us today. A special thank you to this year's Real Women Run sponsors, Rocky Mountain Power and the Salt Lake Board of Realtors. I'm going to turn the time over now to Erin Ryder, one of our organizing committee members, who has led the efforts to plan today's session. She's going to introduce you to our panel, so I'll turn the time now to Erin.
Thank you, Yandere. So yeah, it is my pleasure to be part of the committee charge planning these efforts, led by our wonderful committee chair, Christy Glass. So a quick housekeeping note, we planned a series of questions, but we also want to hear from you, like Yandere said. So if you have questions, please put them in the chat and we will work them into our dialogue here. Okay, so now I want to introduce our panelists. We have a really great panel set up for you today, and we're really excited to hear from them. So our panelists are Julie Jackson from the Granite School District Board. Julie was a teacher for 8 years who specialized in helping disadvantaged students learn at Horizonte Instruction and Training Center in Salt Lake City School District. Then she had 4 kids in 3 years and decided to become a stay-at-home parent. As such, Julie has run a cooperative preschool and was a school board member in a rural town in Washington State. Since Julie returned back to Utah 6 years ago, she's been the outreach coordinator at Horizonte and has been an active member of the PTA and many community councils. And she's also joined several nonprofit boards. Currently, she's on the board of Master Control, a 500-employee tech company headquartered in Cottonwood Heights. And she is just finishing up her MBA at the University of Utah and is loving being a member of the Granite School Board. Next, we have Natalie Pinkney from the South Salt Lake City Council. Natalie serves on the South Salt Lake City Council, and she originally hails from Las Vegas, Nevada. Natalie holds a BA in psychology from Marquette University and a Master's of Education in Educational Leadership and Policy with an emphasis in social justice from the University of Utah. As the first Black representative and one of the youngest elected officials in the state of Utah, Natalie is passionate about intersectional social justice that tackles housing, education, and guaranteed income. On the City Council, Natalie has been able to work with the city and community leaders to open the first financial empowerment center to tackle intergenerational poverty for the diverse population of South Salt Lake, and is now working towards police reform and increasing civic engagement in her city and within the state. Our third panelist is Marcia White, the Vice Chair of the Ogden City Council. Marcia White has her MPA and is the Regional Economic Development Planner at the Wasatch Front Regional Council. She's a civic leader, a community advocate, and engaged in public policy change. She's worked with the government and legislative processes at the local, state, and national level for several years. In her second term as an Ogden City Council member, she's currently serving as the Vice Chair. She's focused efforts on creating financial and operational sustainability in Ogden City. In addition to serving on the City Council, she serves as a member of the Utah League of Cities and Towns Board. She's also published several blogs, articles, and white papers. When not serving her community or working, you can find Marcia riding her bike, walking her dog, or fly fishing, usually not catching, I hear you there, Marcia, with her wife in the place they call home, excuse me. And then our panel today is going to be moderated by Kelleen Potter, the mayor of Heber City. Kelleen is from Ogden, Utah, and graduated from BYU with a bachelor's degree in political science and secondary education, and also a master's degree in public administration. She worked for Lieutenant Governor Olene Walker as the director of elections in the 90s. After many years as a stay-at-home mom, raising her 5 kids, she served a term on City Council and is currently mayor of Heber City. She also works with nonprofits advocating for ranked choice voting. She loves skiing, biking, hiking, and traveling in her spare time. Mayor Potter, I will now turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Erin. It is such a great opportunity to be here. I've attended a few of the Real Women Run trainings over the years, and I love that we can do it this way because there are a few that I wanted to attend and wasn't able to. So I hope that we're able to provide this to a lot of people that maybe wouldn't be able to attend in person. So I'm excited. We're going to have a great conversation today. I've got some questions that I will ask, and we'll just kind of allow the panelists to answer, and I'll throw in my 2 cents from my experience. I'm on year 8 as an elected official, and I am the first female elected as mayor of Heber, so I have some perspective from that experience. So let's get started, and then at the end, we will save some time for questions and answers for those of you who are listening today. Let's talk first about making that decision to run. What led you to decide? Did somebody encourage you? Did you just have always wanted to run? What was it that got you to say, okay, I'm in, I'm gonna run for office? And we'll kind of, whoever wants to go first, I guess, the 3 of you. Anybody ready to jump in? Natalie's smiling. I think it's her. Are you ready?
I'm always smiling, so I'll jump in.
Okay.
Yeah, I've always had a goal to run for office. I wanted to do it probably much later in life is what I suspected, or wanted to do. I actually had a constituent of South Salt Lake tap me on the shoulder. We were at the same social event and told me that folks in the city council had heard of me and that I would be a good contender for city council. And I was really taken aback. I think like most women, you don't really think anyone's watching you or looking at your leadership. And, I didn't really think I was qualified to run for office. But that really got a big conversation going. And that night someone said, here's your first $20 as fundraising. And it felt like the campaign had just kind of started. So, I talked a lot with my partner and with my family and made the decision to just kind of go for it. But it definitely wasn't something that was on my radar until someone tapped me on the shoulder.
Excellent. Thank you.
I'm similar to Natalie that like now looking back, I remember that like a 5-year-old and all through my schooling years, I remember really believing in my heart that I was going to be the first female president of the United States. Like I believed that about myself until I took a government class and realized the president really didn't have much power to do anything. That was, in the 80s. But anyway, then as an adult, I moved to a small town and I said, I wonder what I could do to help this town. And my dad said, you should run for school board. And I went, oh, I should run for school board. That's a great idea. I could do some good and I could help. And so that's what made me run the first time when I ran in Washington State. And then as soon as I moved here, I started looking for the moment when it was right for me to run again, because I saw that I was able to make a difference and was able to do some good.
Excellent. Thank you. Marcia.
Yeah, I grew up in a really political family. My great uncle was a 2-term governor in Nebraska and then 3-term U.S. senator. So my mom worked for him as his executive, like chief of staff. So I grew up in a pretty political family. So I always knew that I wanted to give back to a community that, had given me so much. I moved out here in Utah and then got caught up in Mayor Caldwell's campaign, doing some field campaigning for him, and just knew that if I wasn't on the bus, that I would be left behind. So at the nth hour, which you're never supposed to do, like 15 minutes before closing time, I went in and signed up to be on the council or to run for council. So yeah, that's how I got started.
Excellent. I think these experiences track with the data because typically women need a little nudge, a little something. We don't always say, I'm going to go out and do that. I'd be really good at that. And so that was my experience as well. I'd been staying home with my kids for so many years, and a friend of ours was a legislator, and he called me with some other people on the phone, and they said, we think you should run for city council. And I thought, I don't know anything about cities. I know about the state and federal government, but I don't know about sewer and roads. And anyway, they kept pushing me, and the next day was the filing deadline, and somebody showed up with a $50 check and said, just go file. And I said, okay, but if 2 people file that you like, I'll just withdraw. anyway, so we ended up with 8 people filing. I ran and won. And then after that, I decided while I was on council, I'm either going to run for mayor and change some things, or I'm going to be done because it was driving me crazy. So here I am. All right, so let's talk about some lessons from campaigning. What do you wish you had known when you started your campaign? Like looking back, are there any things that either surprised you or you just think, oh, I wish I would have known that ahead of time. I might have done something differently.
I'll jump in here. I think one of the things very interesting from I think I didn't quite understand the difference between running for city council and running for mayor. So I had all of these grand ideas that I was going to change the world here in Ogden, and realized that I got to do policy and finances basically. So, you know, I think I wish I had known a little bit more about what I was running for.
Excellent. Okay.
I can go next.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so before I ran for office, I actually ran a couple of state legislative campaigns. So that gave me a good insight as a campaign manager of how to run a campaign. But it doesn't really give you a good insight of what it feels like to be a candidate. It's different when you are the staffer and you can tell someone, you know, what to do, but when it's your name, I was kind of surprised about, I would say, the imposter syndrome that I had, you know, trying to fundraise or knocking on the door and telling people, you know, why I was running for office. I'm pretty confident in those areas. I've been knocking a lot of doors and talking to a lot of people, but when it's you there, you just, you know, their nerves are really there. It's a resume every time you're knocking on the door. It's a verbal conversation that people have to trust you. And you realize that they have no reason to trust you. You have no proof, you haven't shown anything. And a lot of times they're right to not trust a politician coming to their door talking to them. So I was really surprised that I hadn't come to that conclusion before being on the staff side, but I think it was impossible for me to realize that until I was actually a candidate and had to be like, okay, I'm doing this for a reason. And even if I lose, I'm going to put my heart into it and show people what I'm passionate about. I think sometimes you get into your own way and you think there would be these outside factors, but sometimes it might be you who's blocking the success.
All right, Julie.
For me, mine, what I wish I had done was educate myself a little bit more about the logistics. I went into my campaign just so focused on the ideals and the things that I wanted to do that I didn't stop and say, wait, what are the rules of a campaign? Like what exact like things do I need to go through? Like I didn't realize that I needed to turn in like a list of my expenditures and all my fundraising. I mean, I kept that luckily, but I didn't realize I was going to have to turn that in. And I like put my signs up all over town. And then I realized there were rules about places to put them up and places not to put them up. I mean, so I made so many logistical mistakes that I could have saved myself if I had just done a little bit to educate myself a little more. And so I ran a primary and a final election. And after the primary election, I went and got somebody who had run for office before and said, okay, I'm gonna ask you every question because I obviously do not know what I'm doing. And that was helpful. And every person I talked to who had run for an election before, every person was so willing to be like, okay, here's what you got to do. I mean, there was not a single person who was like, you are a pain in the butt. They were all like, yes, let's meet. Let's help you figure this out. So, and even small things like realizing there were all kinds of things on the website of the Salt Lake County website, which is where the like elections website that I can't think of the official name of that. Maybe you guys can. That like where I realized, oh, they're like breaking down my precinct by voters, and I can see like in which areas I'm doing well and which areas I'm not, and stuff like that was so helpful. So all those logistical things, I wish I would have thought like got someone to take me through before I started, because I think I would have then been ahead for my own work. I did work I didn't need to do.
Excellent advice. There were a lot of things that I learned, and looking back, wish I had known, but one of them for me was just the fact that I felt so, I was started working on my master's degree while I ran for city council, and I had a political science degree and I'd worked in government, but I just felt like unqualified. I thought, well, I don't know all about roads and sewers and setbacks and, development and all these things. And so I think I came at it almost apologetically, like I wasn't really sure. Anyway, I think should have had more confidence, because you're not being elected to be the expert. Like, there's experts. We have consultants and we have staff members who do those things all day, every day. You're elected to come and represent those people in your community and have a voice that says, hey, we need more parks and trails. And of course, there's a ton to learn, and everything you already know about that entity is valuable, but don't undersell yourself. Don't think that you're not good enough or that you're not capable, because you are. And if you feel that little nudge inside of you, it probably means that that's what you're supposed to be doing. And whether you win this election or not, there's so much value in someone who just wants to serve and is able to kind of see the big picture of some of the real policy needs and things that they want to happen in the community. So that's something I wish I'd known. All right, what other advice, strategies do you feel like really worked for you in your campaign, and things that worked or didn't work, like best advice or things to say, don't do this, it was a waste of time? Anybody want to? I'm going to start calling on you guys and then we'll just take turns. So Julie, do you want to go first on that one?
Sure, I'd love to go first. The things that mattered the most in my campaign, I think, were just tons of conversations. And I just found as many people as I could to meet with. And I asked people, like, who do you think I should meet with? Who do you know who cares about this, who might be willing to talk about it with me? And I was thinking that this time last year, I was like, every single lunch break, I was going to meet with somebody. And when I would meet with them, I would never, ever, ever tell them anything about what I thought. I would say, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? I'm trying to educate myself. I'm trying to understand these issues. And I think that that listening, like, created a whole movement in my campaign where the word of mouth just spread like crazy. Here's somebody who wants to listen to you. And that turned out to be a really big win for me. And I did, that was one thing I did. And the other thing was I really utilized social media. And my social media campaign was not meant to say, here's who I am. It did do that a little, but mostly it said, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? And tons of great feedback. And I also want to say that whether I won or lost my election, I feel like that campaign made me grow so much as a person because of all these amazing people I met. I mean, I grew so much from those conversations. So they were a win, even if I didn't win,
Excellent. Thank you. Marcia?
I'm just building on what Julie said. I did a lot of getting out and listening, but one of the things that I did prior to even running was just a basic SWOT analysis and trying to figure out what my strengths are, what my weaknesses are, and any opportunities and threats, and trying to really figure out what my blind spots were. Trying to figure out that so that I knew and could be one step ahead of somebody that might be running against me. So look, and then then I was able to build on that and get out and talk and create my either my social media or my brochures or my door hangers or whatever. So it was easier for me to put together my next steps for marketing if I knew how I might be portrayed or how I might need to communicate to the public. So just a basic SWOT analysis was what I started with.
Excellent, excellent. Natalie.
Yeah, the biggest thing is don't do this by yourself. It doesn't matter if you're running for city council, a small town, or school board. You can't do this by yourself. You're gonna drive yourself crazy if you're, living with someone like my fiance might drive them crazy. That was the biggest thing. I tried to do a lot of it by myself until, after my primary, I finally asked for help, someone who could help get volunteers to come help us knock doors and help with social media, especially with like my website and my photos. I'm really big on making sure that everything is high definition. I think the way you portray yourself on social media is how voters will perceive you. So, if you don't have a high quality picture or website, they start to question whether or not you're qualified for the role. So those things I knew I couldn't do on my own. I'm not a photographer. I'm not a videographer or anything of that such. So the biggest thing was to get help. And then also not being afraid to ask people, even the closest people in your life, for help, whether that is on the campaign or with money. A lot of times people don't like to talk about fundraising, and candidates hate fundraising, myself included. But that is something that is, depending on the race that you're in, really essential. And I think a lot of times candidates who hesitate, that really stops the momentum that you can actually build, because, if you're afraid to ask your network and everyone you've ever known to chip in to your movement, it's kind of like, well, how can we ask people to be a part of your messaging if you can't convince the folks in your own network to support you with this campaign? So that's another way to kind of look at it too. But it is nerve-wracking and it is difficult.
Can I follow up on that, Natalie? I was so surprised to see how much my network of friends and people, every person I've ever known, like you said, how much they were excited to jump on board. Like, it's like people want to be involved in these things, but they don't know how. And when they have a connection with somebody who says, here's how you can be involved, they're so excited. And I kept feeling like they were doing something nice for me. And in the end, I realized, no, they are wanting to be a part of democracy. And so they're thrilled that they're being a part of it. And the other thing is that a little trick I started using, because I hated saying, will you support me? And everybody go tell everyone how awesome I am. I hated doing that. And so I started saying, we need to spread this message. This is about a message. This isn't about a person. This is about a message. And then I would advocate for it fiercely. But I found I had a harder time advocating fiercely for myself. But man, you put that message out there and I'd say, yeah, everybody get out there because this is important, So that was a little trick I found for myself.
Excellent. Those all track as well with the data. It seems like women, it's harder to self-promote sometimes for women. I'm generalizing, but that's what the data shows. And to be able to do it for the cause or the message, I totally agree with that. I also found that, I tell people this all the time if they want to run. In local races, there are people in every community who are networked and they care about what's happening in government. They might not necessarily be running, but they're going to have 30 to 50 people that they talk to, whether it's through work or through other connections. And you have, they're going to tell their network, oh, this is who you vote for. And it's like, I was that way. Like, people always call me and say, who should I vote for? So go to those people first when you're thinking about running or when you are running, and do exactly what Julie said. Listen to what they're interested in. But when they think, oh, that person seems competent, they're caring, they're going to listen. And once they start telling their network, it's, I had an opponent, I ran against the incumbent, and it was like an arms race. He would get more signs and bigger signs. And historically, I think in Heber, that was right. You had the right name and a lot of signs. And that doesn't necessarily mean anything, because I would have people say, well, he's my neighbor and I have to put his sign up, but really I'm voting for you. So there's a lot more to just those face-to-face contacts than just, if it's a bigger race, if you're running for Congress, yeah, you got to have a ton of signs, you got to do all your stuff. But in local races, you can win these races just with these face-to-face contacts and really getting out there. So that would be what I learned. Let's talk about fundraising. I hate asking people for money. And it was kind of like that whole idea of it's doing me a favor. And I guess I'm going to ask these guys to tell us, what are some of your tips and tricks, or what did you learn that would be valuable with fundraising? My first campaign, I spent $2,000. I didn't ask anyone for $1. Like, I got a few unsolicited donations. And then when I ran for mayor, I spent $5,000 and got 4,000 unsolicited donations. But since then, I've learned a little more about that. And really, it's like Julie said, you're doing people a favor who have the same vision as you, who want the good government, but they have no interest in running. And so that's their way of contributing. And a lot of people really are willing and happy to do that. But it takes an ask. And that's the thing that if I decide to run again, I'll have to do it differently next time. But let's go to our panelists and see what they can tell us about fundraising. We'll start with Marcia.
Yeah, I mean, nobody ever likes to ask for money. So I started with my friends and family. I just did it. I went through my contacts and just started, sent a letter. In fact, my first campaign, I got beat up a lot because apparently people don't realize that I had friends and family in Nebraska and California, and the paper actually came out and said, oh my gosh, she's being backed by somebody in California. And it was literally all of my friends and family. So that's where I started. And then once I started to build that and get some confidence behind asking for money, I just went out and started to ask for money. So that's how you just have to do it. It's part of the evil part of running. And I don't think that it has anything to do with men or women. I think it just has to do with asking for money. So.
Yeah.
Sorry, Natalie, go ahead.
Yeah, great point, Marsha. You just have to do it. You have to rip off the Band-Aid and don't be afraid to have an active ask. One thing that I learned from my campaign is to always keep a Rolodex. That's actually something that I'm always thinking about and really organizing it. If you really can organize it by a person's name, how much you would ask for if they've given in the past, it really makes it helpful because the best advice I've ever had is just to go right to it. I know sometimes when people make calls, they want to like spend time being like, how are you doing? And that actually makes it feel more shady, right? Like I'm going to spend the majority of the time seeing how you're doing, and then I'm eventually going to ask you for money versus just, hey, I'm running for office. Can you pitch in $50? Can you pitch in $20? And then maybe catch up with them afterwards. It's really difficult. Like I said, as being a candidate and also being someone who's helped other people fundraise, if you find yourself being difficult, ask a friend to sit there and literally babysit you. That's called a call time manager. They are your best friend or your worst enemy, depending on how you look at it. But I had one of my friends there and we spent 2 hours and it was just like, go do it. And, if you dedicate it, you get it out the way, and then you don't have to really worry about it. A lot of these folks want you to win, right? So that's the biggest thing. You don't want to launch a campaign and then you lose versus trying your hardest to fundraise. So I would agree to just kind of rip off the Band-Aid and go for it. And don't be afraid to actively ask. And sometimes people can give more than you think also. So don't lowball just because you're afraid of asking for money.
Thank you, Natalie. Julie.
Yeah, when I signed my name to run, I decided I was going to spend $5,000 of my own money, and that it was going to be worth it to me to just spend the money rather than fundraise. Then I realized I was going to be running a primary. And that means that it's going to cost you double what you thought, because now you're essentially running two separate campaigns. You're running twice. And so then I had to decide if I was going to spend $10,000. And so I spent the $5,000 on the primary, and then I reevaluated where I was. And I was in the lead, but my opponent had spent more than double what I had. And so I knew he was going to come out in big force in the final election. So I decided that I was going to fundraise. And the way that I went about that was I made a list of people who I felt comfortable asking money from. That included family. And I had a hard time distinguishing whether or not I was going to ask people who I knew were not in a position to donate, financially. And in the end, I decided to ask them for money because I think that there's some joy in giving $5 if you want to participate. And that wasn't my decision to make for someone to decide if they could afford it or not, that was their decision. So I did, and the methods that I used to do that are, if first I used the program, I used GoFundMe in order to organize all of my fundraising. And then I used the program MailChimp, which you can just find online, and created a list. And then I could send out to those people an email that said, that I like put together nicely. My social media person did it for me, so that it looked nice and professional. And we sent it out. I sent out an original one, and then I waited for 2 weeks, and then I sent it out and then whoever donated, I took them off the list. Then I sent it again 2 weeks later, and then I sent it again 2 weeks later. And then I said, that's all I'm getting, and that's what I get to spend. So that's how I handled it. In the end, I spent $18,000. So $13,000 was how much I raised. And my opponent still doubled my spending. So, but I still won, so it was okay. But the point of saying that is to say, don't let that intimidate you that you can only raise a certain amount of funds, right? Because that's not the point.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay. Oh, did I get everybody? I just lost track. Okay, I did. Sorry. Okay, let's talk about the whole category of dealing with difficult people. Politics can be a full contact sport. And sometimes, I would say most times you're going to hear some unkind words. There are going to be people who misrepresent what you say in your campaign or who you are. And it takes some skin thickening to be able to run for office. And so let's talk a little bit about how do you deal with that? Like if you're going door to door and someone's rude to you, how do you handle it if someone says something mean or unkind or not true about you on social media? Let's go there. Let's see, let's start with Natalie.
Great question. So I don't know if it was my first day out or my second day out canvassing. I had just gone to the city hall. I had no pamphlets with me. I only had some business cards that I just printed. I was just so eager. I wanted to knock doors as quickly as possible. And I remember I got to this one door and I did my little spiel and literally just got yelled at, like got screamed at, got told I didn't know what I was doing, that what I was talking about was dumb. And I was just so taken aback. I actually went into my car and I cried and I called them my kitchen cabinet. So if you don't have a kitchen cabinet, they're like advisors that you can call to basically help me say that I should stay in the game. I was like, I don't know if I should do this. And it was really hard, but I was glad that I had that network to support me. And I decided to get out my car and to keep knocking doors. And even though it was one person that was mean to me, the rest of the night, everyone was very kind and had really great conversation. So, I'm a pretty sensitive person. So, if you feel that way and if you really are scared about negative people at the door, what I will say is it doesn't happen a lot. And also it's not worth it to fight with them or try to get them on your side, right? You only need 50 votes plus one. So that means that majority, that means that the other part of that 49% will not like you. That's kind of, and once you realize that and that's what my kitchen cabinet told me. They said you only needed 50 plus one. So that means not everyone's going to like you. And that's okay that everyone won't like you. They will question your intentions. They'll question what you're doing. They might say it on Facebook, but I think you have to continue to just prove yourself through your actions and they hope that your record will show people who you actually are. It's a thankless job. You're trying to be a servant leader. And if you're coming in here for people to praise you and thank you, then maybe this isn't the role for you to sign up for, because many of us will tell you that it's not all waving and parades and things of that magnitude. Like Marcia said, it's a lot of finance and policy. So.
Thank you, Natalie. Marcia.
I don't know that I have much other than, yeah, you need to have thick skin. And I think there's actually Mayor Corradini in one of the first Real Women Run events that was ever held that basically said that same thing, Natalie. She basically said, all you need to do is win 50% plus one, and yet you have to realize that the other 49% of the people are not going to like you for some reason, for something you said, for something you did. And so if you know that going into it, then it's much easier than just to feel good about yourself. I think the hard part for me is that it's become really hard, and you know, social media has made it really hard. I think Zoom meetings have made it hard. We're getting, I feel like we're getting a lot more divisiveness and people just being able to complain without a face, just because of how we've had to operate in the last year. So I hope to get back, and we're not in our chambers yet, but I hope to get back so that I can have those face-to-face meetings. And I think one of the things that I try to do is to say, look, we may not always agree, but I hear you. I'm listening to you. It's just that I don't agree with you, and you need to respect my opinion, and I respect yours. And so, but thick skin really helps for sure.
Thank you, Julie.
I honestly cannot think of any time that anybody was rude to me on the campaign trail. People were so respectful when I met with them, although I did run during COVID. So I was not knocking on doors constantly. I was leaving things at doors. So most of the people who I was talking to were already knowing what they were getting into when they opened the door to talk to me. But I did have a little bit of mudslinging come from my opponent, and which it really surprised me, because I had a good relationship, I felt, with my opponent. But then at the very end, something happened, and I don't know what happened, but somehow it turned angry. And so that was a real moment for me. Like, how am I going to handle this? I did not expect it. And I felt like it was a risky choice, but I decided to ignore it and just move forward. And through the whole campaign, I had said great things about my opponent. Actually, I had said, you know, this person's a great person. I feel like I'm more qualified, and I'm what this area needs right now. You know, so I was constantly sending that message, and I just decided to continue to send it and just ignore what was being said. And I don't know, it worked out okay in the end. I don't know if that works every time, but it worked okay for me. And I think, though, that regardless of the campaigning, I think in the campaigning you might meet some people who might say some hard things, but I think you're going to meet people who say harder things to you when you're actually in the seat. Like, when you've been elected, I think you're going to have more angry and more rudeness than you did in your campaign. So I think you have to be prepared for that as part of the job every time.
Mayor, if I could just really step in here, one of the things that I think is really interesting is that a lot of times people that say bad things, like your opponent did, are running against you. And if you just keep running for something instead of running against something, that helped me too. I'm running for helping Ogden. I'm running for changing policy. I'm running for, instead of worrying about what my opponent was saying or what other people were saying about me. So
that's huge, Marshall. I totally agree with that.
Yeah, excellent advice. I think sometimes negative campaigning works. You see it sometimes in the national level or the state level, but I believe that in my community, most people would be turned off by that. And I watched my opponent, particularly his children, said some really bad things about me on Facebook. And I would engage initially sometimes if I felt like I needed to set the record straight, if it was in a thread that were a bunch of people that were reading. And then I would just kind of sit back, because I thought, they're going to self-destruct. Like there's nothing good that's going to come from this because they're not telling the truth. But I never said anything, degrading or untruthful. Like I just told my position, explained the difference, because obviously we both had a record. He was an incumbent and I'd been on city council, but I was really careful to always be respectful and not unkind. And I felt like in the end, that's really what people would want, at least in my community. I think the world is more polarized now because of some things since I ran, but I still believe that in the end, people appreciate these kind of things that we've just heard, is just telling your story and not getting involved in the muck. Someone used to say to me, don't wrestle with a pig because the pig likes it and you both get dirty. That was what someone said to me when I was deciding how to respond to a comment at one point. And it was good advice. Like, of course, I'm not one to get in there and fight like that. So I found it easier to just step back and not engage. So, all right.
I had one more thing about it.
Yeah.
I was also interested that my opponent continued to try to engage with me, like on Facebook or, I don't know, texting me or whatever. And because we were on originally good terms, I was cautious, but I was trying to be polite, but then that ended up biting me in the butt in the end. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's wise to just kind of draw a line and say, no, you know what? We're opponents for a minute here. And then maybe after we can collaborate. But right now we are opponents. I think that's important to understand.
Yeah, and there's times when you have to set the record straight because you don't want it left out there for all the however many hundred people that they said something that's not true. So yeah, it's a tricky balance, but I think that's all good advice. Okay, one last question, and then we're going to jump into the Q&A time. And I want to talk a little bit about bias, particularly gender bias. Like I've been in some trainings and heard things that were said to females. I mean, the classic one for me is when I'm standing with a bunch of men and someone comes up and they look at all the men and go, which one of you are the mayor? Because they knew that somebody there was the mayor, but they didn't even look at me. They looked at all the men. Which one of you are the mayor? So sometimes when you come into these things as a female, depending probably where you live or what people are used to, there's some comments, oh, you should be home with your kids, or how are you going to do that? Because your kids, or, things like that maybe people might not say to a man. How do you deal with that? Have you had to deal with that? And if so, how do you navigate people's assumptions about whether it's the role of women to be in elected office? Maybe some areas were past this, but it wasn't that case where I come from. Start with whose turn is it? Julie.
I think that I had such a huge just outflowing of support and excitement that I was running. And, at the time that I decided to run, I was a stay-at-home mom. I'm still a stay-at-home mom, but I have some business ventures too. But, and so I really wondered if people were going to think I was legitimate. And I wondered myself if I was legitimate, honestly. And I had to just say to myself, no, you have something to offer. Like, remember that you don't have to have these exact things in order to have something to offer. You can have these other things that you have to offer instead. And those are legit and they are going to be beneficial. And so I just put everything I had on remembering those things that I had to offer. And when I presented that to the people around me, it was like people were so excited that, to support someone who was a stay-at-home mom. Honestly, sort of like, no, and also all the other stay-at-home parents or parents that had one of the partnership being a stay-at-home parent, they all wanted to support that. Like, yeah, like you can do it. It was as if they were doing it for themselves as much as for me or for the cause, right? So I felt in gender bias, actually maybe the opposite direction, that I felt extra support for being a woman. I myself did deal a little bit with the imposter syndrome and had to really force myself out of that. I recommend to everybody. I did not know about the kitchen. Natalie, I wish I had known about the kitchen cabinet. I needed a kitchen cabinet big time. And what I had instead was I had a playlist and I would turn on that playlist and it would just get me pumped up and remind me that I had something inside of me that the Granite School District needed. And that really helped me when I felt that imposter syndrome sneak in to, my heart a little bit. I could push it out through that.
Excellent. Thank you. Marcia.
Yeah, I mean, I think the hard part is dealing with the gender bias. I think one of the things that I try to do, I use a lot of sarcasm and humor and try to point out to people that yes, women can lead. Yes, women can be in leadership positions. And so I do a lot of, I don't take it personally just because, I mean, I know I should probably because I am a woman, but it's just a learning. It's an opportunity for me to educate. I do want to say though something about imposter syndrome, because I think over the years what I've realized is that that's okay. It's okay to think that you're a fraud, because guess what? That means that you're learning, and that means that you're expanding your envelope, and that means that you get to do some things that other people don't do. And so the kitchen cabinet is a wonderful place for when you feel like you have imposter syndrome, because they are the people that knock you down and say, yeah, get back up, go for it. And so I'm writing notes as much as I am talking, but yes, we're all going to have imposter syndrome, period, the end. Just get it off. You're going to have it, period, the end. So that's it.
And there's something endearing. There's nothing worse than an elected official that thinks they know everything. So I would rather have somebody that thinks, wait, I don't know everything. All right, Natalie.
I agree. And I would also say, I don't know if the imposter syndrome goes away. I mean, I still get a little nervous before city council meetings, even though like the majority of people aren't tuned in and, we do the same type of procedures. But, for me, it's obviously, I deal with some bias as being a woman, but also as being a woman of color and also being young. There's a lot of things that people feel when you're running for office. When you're young, you're a woman and a woman of color. So the intersections of that, I did meet with some bias on the campaign trail a little bit, but I expected that. I think you have to be confident that, what you're doing might be crazy in a sense that a lot of people don't do it, but like you are the right person to run for office. If you've decided up to put your name on the paper, you've already said it out loud that you're the right person. You just need to believe that and know that those biases are going to come. It doesn't make it easier. I have dealt with some discrimination at the door that I don't really talk about, but I have people in my own life that I can really process that about. And you really have to remember why you're doing it. And that is something, if you haven't written down why you're doing it, sometimes people do it in a stump speech, but really do it, because especially towards the end of the campaign trail, I didn't deal with a negative opponent, but like just the stress that you get, sometimes you really question if you're doing the right thing, and the biases and the stress takes a lot over you. So, you have to remind yourself at the end of the day that why to help you keep going. But it does happen, I think you need to be prepared that there are people out there that are generally jerks and they're mean, and that's unfortunate, but it's okay to stand up for yourself too. I think sometimes people think, oh, because I'm an elected official, I can't say I disagree, or I can't stick up for myself. And I'm a little feisty. I will maybe, if you're going to yell, I might give it back as well, just because it's like, hey, I might be elected, but I'm still a human being at the end of the day. And we should all, have some respect.
I'm muted again. For me to overcome that imposter syndrome, I would listen to Brene Brown, and that's a whole other conversation, but just little snippets about, vulnerability and authenticity. And I'd hear her and just go, okay, I'm doing this. So that was always helpful to me. All right, we are done with our questions, but we're going to turn it over to Amberly, who's going to help navigate some of the Q&A from everyone listening. So Amberly.
Here,
Oh,
I can
no.
pop in and help with that.
No, it's you. I'm so sorry.
No,
I'm so
you're just
sorry. I
fine.
thought she was doing it.
You're
Thank
just fine.
you.
We've got a couple questions that came in from the chat. Kasha Hendrickson wants to know, how do you get past that first step? She says, I keep researching and looking and just stall when it comes to taking any real action. So open to any of you wonderful women on our panel or Mayor Potter.
I'll talk about it. You know, it was a big thing for me to create a logo. Like once I created a logo, I was like, okay, now I'm in. But I actually, I have a brother-in-law who's in graphics design. And so I did it for free. I just called him and said, secretly, don't tell anyone in case I decide not to do this. But can you just create a logo? Here's some signs that are kind of like things I like. Would you help me kind of brand myself? And it was sort of like, as soon as I was branded, it felt like, oh yeah, okay, I can do this. I saw my name there and I was like, okay. So I would say that's the first step. And if you don't feel comfortable taking that step, I would say the next step, or the other first step you could do, is to make a list of everyone you know. And I divided that list into people I would ask for money, people I would ask to canvas for me, and people who I could ask to put a sign in their yard. And then I also made a list of people who I wanted to get to know. So I would say those are two great starting points.
Those are great pieces of advice. And I know Councilmember White mentioned the friends and family list when she started her fundraising. So very crucial. Another question from Laura Thomas. This is a great one. She says, I'm curious, how do people manage a career on top of their elected official responsibilities? And I know that one might vary depending on the position. Some positions are only part-time, some might be more full-time. But how does that work for you, wonderful ladies?
I can take that. I also want to say another first step is to tell people that you're running for office, and then they'll ask you why you're running. And if you don't know an answer, then that's a good place to start first. But sorry, the second question, I just forgot it as I was trying to address it. Can you say it one more time? I apologize.
No, you were just fine. The question was, how do people manage a career on top of their elected official responsibilities?
So I was actually in a unique situation when I got elected starting at the beginning of 2020. I actually quit my job and I was in the middle of a job hunt for the first 3 months of the year. So that was really interesting to see the dynamics of running for office and trying to get a job. So depending on where you are, there are rules. Being a government official does make you a really interesting situation, I should say, with a lot of companies. So really make sure that you're upfront in the beginning. And then also, if you're at your current job, also make sure you're upfront. I'm always shocked when sometimes people are like, my job doesn't know I'm running for office. And I'm like, what do you mean? It's public. Like they will find out. So it's good to make sure you have that conversation, and then also talk to somebody who's already in that position. I didn't understand how legislators just left their job for 45 days until I talked to someone, and then you can figure out the conversation that they have at work.
Thank you. And I would even argue that looking for a job is a full-time job. So props to you for managing both at the same time.
I also want to say that I think women are the best at juggling multiple things. So career, kids, family, parents, anything, might as well throw running for mayor in that. So I think that women are the best equipped to do this instead of the other way around.
Hear, hear.
I want to say to that too, that my campaign was like a huge growing experience for everyone in my family. My 4 teenage children, they all had to go out and knock on doors, and they had to organize my volunteers for me. They had to go put up signs. They did all kinds of great stuff. And so they really grew. And I think we grew as a family together as well. So it wasn't like it was sectioned off as a separate thing. Like it became a part of what we're doing, our cause as a family group, That's not about the career, but the family part.
No, that's great. And what a great example you're setting of being involved in the civic process by having them be involved from such a young age. So that's wonderful. Our last question is from Margaret Regier. How do you suggest someone prepare for an eventual run for office, both personally and professionally? That's a great question.
I'll throw out on that one. I think you just have to do a realistic assessment of your life, the time that you have. I mean, as far as, if I were running for something for the first time, I'd probably go to some of those meetings. I should have gone to some city council meetings and kind of got a handle on what the issues were and how it worked. I didn't, but it's a good idea if you can. I see people do it often in our council now. And also, one thing I had an idea of what I thought I was supposed to be doing in my different roles in life. Like I need to be there when my kids get home from school. And sometimes some of those things, like my kids have said to me now, years later, we didn't care that you weren't there. Because I said, I don't know if I should run again. I miss a lot of things and I'm not there. And they're like, I'd way rather have you be mayor than home with cookies when we get home. Like they'll listen to public hearings, like they're very interested in what's happening. My daughter has mayor's lunch and brings her friends. And so I have found benefits of that have benefited my kids in their education and in their, particularly my daughters, and seeing what they could do. Where I thought I was hurting them, I think it was just a little different path for them to have the benefit of having their mom be mayor and what came with that. Where I wasn't considering that when I was weighing it out. I was only considering, well, I'm not going to be there then, and I have to be gone on Tuesday nights. And so I think you have to take a whole assessment of that because, yeah, it's hard. It's going to take a lot of time. You're going to miss some stuff. And you're going to feel torn sometimes. I remember my youngest daughter hanging on my leg, don't go, for a while. And now she's the one going, Mom, you have to run again. I want to be in high school and tell people my mom's the mayor. So anyway, I think just taking an assessment as you think about what this will do in your life, but what really matters to you most and what your goals are and where you want to make a difference. Sometimes you have to sacrifice because we can't do everything at the same time.
That is awesome. It sounds like you've got some pretty amazing kids. Does anyone else want to add to this question?
I'll add to that. On the personal side of that, I felt like it was really important for me to start, or it was helpful that I did a lot of preparation before. I knew, like 4 years in, before I knew, okay, in the next election cycle, I'm going to run. So in those 4 years, I was able to spend time going to, in the school, in the school board realm, going to lots of community council meetings and learning what was going on in different PTAs and different communities, making sure I went to every school board meeting if I could. And so going to all of those things to understand what's going on in the community is really helpful. I think knowing what's going on in the community is so key to being good at what you're doing, to making good policy decisions in the end. And then the other thing is that I practiced disagreeing with people. So I practiced when I was in conversation, being able to say, oh, that's interesting, because I would think this other thing, and here's how I would perceive it, and tell me more about how you see that. And I, instead of just saying, oh, yes, okay, we all agree, I really tried to make sure that I pushed people a little bit, but still respectfully. And it took me out of my comfort zone, but I felt like now that's a skill that I'm glad I honed a little bit.
That is great advice. I'm going to throw in a plug here, but those of you who are participating in this webinar and are listening and watching, this is a great way as well to prepare for a run for office, to learn from others what the experience was like, to learn about the things that you maybe need to be thinking about. And we're going to have other opportunities as well where we're going to teach the basics of running, how to fundraise, how to create your campaign plan. So thank you for allowing me that plug right there. I want to thank our panelists, and I'm going to turn the time back over to Erin Ryder, who is going to wrap us up. Thank you so much for those who submitted questions as well.
Thank you. So yeah, like Yandri said, thank you so much to our panelists. This has been really, really lovely to have you all here and to have this conversation together. And I think it's been really encouraging for me just to listen to all of you. I think Marcia said she was taking notes earlier, and boy, I sure have been taking notes too. So this has been really, really lovely. So thank you to all of our panelists, Mayor Potter, council members Pinkney and White, and to board member Julie Jackson. So thank you so much. And thank you again to everyone who also was watching this session today. We really appreciate your participation. Please make sure to sign up for our next webinar, which is going to focus specifically on what it's like to run for office as a young woman. So some of the questions and things that Natalie brought up earlier, the dynamics of being younger and running for office, we're going to have a full panel talking just to that issue. So make sure to sign up for that. That will be on March 9th, and we will see you then. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.